Perfecto. Okay, and so for starters, we're going to be discussing today how we fall into idolatry. And so the concept and idea of today will be nature versus nurture. If you are familiar with that term, it's how our family versus how our environment affects us. So I will begin by discussing our nature, which is connected to generational idolatry. And so, for starters, we're going to discuss what is generational idolatry. So, when we look at how generation is defined in connection to family, it is a single step in the line of descendants from an ancestor, representing a group of individuals born and living at roughly the same time. So, when we think about that, we'll think about a grandparent, a parent, a child, a grandchild, things like that. And then idolatry, we've been learning a lot about idolatry. So, just simply put, it is defined as a representation or symbol of an object of worship. So, when we put these things together, we can define generational idolatry simply as something, an object or an idea that has been worshiped and passed down through generations. And so when we look at generational idolatry in the word, we can study out Exodus 20 and 5. So before this, it is Yah speaking to the children of Israel and giving them the commandments. In the first two, he tells them, you should not have any gods before you, and you should not make any carved images or idols. And so here um, we leave off and it says, you shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am a jealous Elohim, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands and to those who love me and keep my commandments. And so, just briefly here, we see. I wanted to point out with the phrase "bow down to them" in the Hebrew, that means just simply to worship and to show deep reverence, and then to serve, it also means to be enslaved to. So to be in bondage to whatever it is that you worship or obey. And then when we look at Psalms 135, we see that you become what you worship. And so here it says, the idols of the nations are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they do not speak. Eyes they have, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear, nor is there any breath in their mouths. Those who make them are like them, so is everyone who trusts in them. And so this is so profound. And if we kind of focus on verse 18, it shows us that the idols that we make, the idols that we create, we become just like those idols and it becomes a part of our identity. And then to take it a step further, we also see, let's just say you didn't make the idol, but you trusted and you chose to trust in that idol, you still then become like that idol. So if your grandparents have created the idol and it has become a part of their identity and you entrusted in that thing, you now have become just like the same idol that they created. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so it gets very interesting, and I just wanted to create to show you guys kind of a photo of what it looks like. So for starters, I want us to know that our idolatry causes us to fall into sin. So we see that idolatry and sin go hand in hand. And sin, in return, gives idolatry a legal right to access our bloodlines. And so, as we are falling into these idols and we are worshiping these things and becoming like them, we are now finding our identity in these idols, and then we are passing them down along the bloodline. And so here is just a graph, just basically us looking at kind of how genes and DNA are transferred within science, pretty much from mothers and fathers and grandparents, your grandmother or your grandfather, how their traits, how their characteristics and their genes and their DNAs and their identities are passed down. And you'll see that the child is a makeup of not only their parents, but their parents' parents as well. And so there's all these influences when it comes to genes. And this is just a physical representation of and a glimpse of what happens in the spiritual realm through our generation. So we take on and we embody and we pass down those identities. And so when we look here, I wanted to revisit Exodus 20 and 5 in the AMP version just because it goes a little deeper. And it shows that um, you shall not worship them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous and passionate God, demanding what is rightfully and uniquely mine, visiting, avenging the iniquity, sin, and guilt of the fathers of the children. Now, I want y'all to pay attention to this part right here. That is calling the children to account for the sins of their fathers to the third and fourth generations and of those who hate me. So we see here that the choices that we make and the sin that we allow ourselves to be in is passed down to our children and our children's children when it's not dealt with. So in your family, let's just say there's idolatry and you have not come into covenant with Yeshua and have not repented of those sins. You now, as a child, are dealing with the consequences of the addictions from your forefathers. So if your grandfather was an addict and now you're struggling with that same sin, you could not have even met your grandfather. You are still in bondage to the same thing that he was unable to surrender and be free from. And so if we can go to the next one, it gets deep, y'all. I'm so excited. And so here we see in Matthew 25, 24, and 5, this is an instance when the Jews basically were telling the Roman leaders that they wanted to crucify Yeshua. And so the Roman leader is like, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. And then they respond in return. And all the people answered and said, his blood be on us and on our children. So there was an awareness, and they knew that their actions would then filter into their children and their bloodline based on their decisions. So the decisions of our ancestors um, basically make a major impact on the spiritual warfare that we have to endure on our bloodlines today. Some of the stuff that we all dealing with ain't got nothing to do with us. It just has to do with stuff that has constantly been passed down. But when we make a choice to be in covenant with Christ, he then gives us the tools to dismantle and to let go of all of that. But we'll get more into that later. And so there are different types of generational idolatries. And so we're just going to kind of touch on a few traditions, ideologies, and oaths. And so here we'll start with traditions. And so traditions are the handing down of statements, beliefs, legends, customs, information, etc., from generation to generation, especially by word of mouth or by practice. So one of the first things that's very common is religion. Based on what household that you were born in determines what religion you have been introduced to. Anything that has been taught to you that is outside of Christ, unfortunately, is false. It's a false God that you have been groomed and brought up to worship. And then on the flip side, even if you are following Christ, there are still man-made traditions and things that have seeped into the church and seeped into religion that does not necessarily align with the word. So it's so important to take everything that you've learned through religion or tradition or whatever you've been brought up with and assess it compared to what the word says about that very thing. And then when we look at familial traditions, it could be basically things that we have done throughout our families for generations. I know there's some ideas of like, oh, on my 21st birthday, I'm gonna go get drunk, or oh, when you turn a certain age as a man, you should be out here having sex, or whatever that looks like for your family. There's certain type of music that we've been introduced to embrace through family and traditions. I know for me, I loved oldies. And then I got aware and more mature in my faith and started to understand the effects of music. And I had to stop listening to that stuff because of the things that I was able to hear and pinpoint that wasn't in alignment with the word. And then last but not least, matriarchy. It's a social system where women, typically the mother or oldest female, holds primary authority, leading the household and often controlling property and decision making. And so this one here is very interesting because a lot of factors can play into why a woman has to be the head of the household. But unfortunately, the word still says in Ephesians 5:23 that the man should be the head, the husband should be the head, or whoever the man is, God has intended for them to be the head of the household. So that is still a tradition that is not biblical. And then when we look here into ideologies, we see that ideologies are a set of shared beliefs, values, and ideas that shape how a person or a group understands the world and acts within it. So there's different beliefs and values when it comes to marriage. You may have been brought up in a household where they told you that you was an independent woman, you didn't need no man as a woman, or your value and worth was found in a man. Or for men, like, oh, your freedom is over when you get married, or marriage is miserable. Whatever the thing that your family said a lot has become a part of your understanding about that topic outside of the word. Same with your identity. They may have told you you got to look a certain type of way, you got to be a certain skin color, you got to have a certain body type. Whatever that is, that defines and shape your identity. Again, that goes outside of the word. How you raise a family. Um, Nowadays we have this whole idea of same-sex marriage and same-sex things. Like your family could have believed in that, and that could have been something that you were taught was okay. But again, that goes outside of the word. And so there's these different ideas that we learn, and the list goes on that you can learn within these things, and you just have to align it with the word. And so when we look, even with children, children not being taught to respect elders, not being taught to honor and show respect to their parents. That's another thing. Financial literacy and career. The ideas about money. And we're going to talk about that a little later in part two. So I'm not going to go too deep, but basically just what your idea is on money, like frivol- frivolously spending, spending money that you don't have, or your career, you got to make it to the top, or you're trying to be a doctor or a lawyer in order for to have happiness, or money is the key to happiness. There's all these ideas that we're taught through our family that becomes a part of our identity that we idolize unknowingly. And then last but not least, I want to discuss oaths. So oaths are basically a solemn or formal declaration invoking Yah or a god or other objects of reverence as witness to the truth of a statement or to the binding nature of a promise or undertaking and an act of making such a declaration. And so the two things I want to focus on are sororities, fraternities, and secret societies. It's been a lot of controversy going around about like whether we should or whether we shouldn't. The reality is that if you're in anything that is causing you to make an oath to any gods outside of Yah is false. And so being a part of these things has put your bloodline at risk for the consequences that you have to endure because of that covenant that is being made. Covenants outside of Yah is automatically being made with Satan. And then in witchcraft, if you go see a psychic, if you do astrology, if you talk to the dead, necromancy, anything that you do in any form of witchcraft, sacrificing something in exchange for for a desire, all of that, you're having an exchange. You're telling Satan, "Hey, if you give me this, I will give you access to my bloodline," and that flows continuously in somebody until somebody breaks it through the blood of Christ. And unfortunately, we perish for the lack of knowledge. And so 1 Corinthians 10:1 through 6, I'm just kind of briefly gonna go again, but to this is basically like, moreover, brethren, I will not that you be ignorant. So this is Paul telling them, don't be ignorant how that all your fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea. And basically he describes kind of what they went through in the wilderness. And he tells them, now these things were of our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they lusted. So it is up to us to learn from the mistakes of our forefathers, see what they did, learn and understand the patterns, really look at your bloodline and see what patterns are there constantly going from generation to generation. What addictions are there that's constantly being passed down? What sins that are constantly that we are all struggling with? What sicknesses, what diseases, what is showing up within the family bloodline? That is a great place to start for you to pinpoint, okay, how can we take care of this? And we can go to the next slide. And so, just briefly to understand, in the Greek, ignorance means someone who lacks knowledge, information, or education about a specific subject or in general. And so, it's not to know, not to understand the unknown and to err or sin through mistake and to be wronged. And so, unfortunately, the word says that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge because thou hast rejected knowledge. And so, there is a such thing as having to deal with consequences, even if you don't know that you're sinning. You can sin through a mistake and not even know that this thing is attached to you. And so that is why it's important to go to Christ, to pray, and to ask Him to reveal, Father, what is on my bloodline? What do I need to break off? What is it that I have to be released from? And I think that is a great place to start. Saying this is, we're teaching this not so you can feel hopeless. And if you're getting convicted or feeling like there's no way out, just remember that Christ is the way out. Okay. And so let's just talk about the love for our family. The love that we have for the people can cause us to fall into idolatry. So, all those things that we just learned about, you are more prone to giving an ear or to listen to somebody that you love and being more vulnerable to listening to them and allowing them to have influence over you. And so Matthew 10:37 says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And so we have to understand that Yah's love looks different from the way that the world teaches us how to love. We have to understand boundaries. We have to know that we have to love Christ first in His word and build a relationship with Him. And then everything else comes second. And so, unfortunately, the honest truth is that choosing righteousness will bring division. Luke 12:51 through 53 says, do you suppose that I came to give peace on earth? I tell you, not at all, but rather division. For from now on, five in one house will be divided, three against two, two against three. Father will be divided against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother in law against daughter in law, and daughter in law against mother in law. So we see that when you choose to be on the side of righteousness, it will come with tension and it will come with conflicts and the things and the traditions that have been passed down through your families. You're going to have to go against those things. And last but not least, I want to talk about how idolatry is sown as a seed, and each generation has a choice of watering that seed or destroying it. And so each generation can choose. So do not be deceived. Galatians 6:7 says, do not be deceived. Elohim is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that he will reap also. So just remember that, like, if there is things that have been built within your bloodline, you have the power to destroy it. And let's not water those seeds and know that you have the power through Christ to completely dismantle those things from your bloodline. And the decisions that you make today will affect your children in the future. And that is it. Let's talk. Well, what are we talking about? We could stop the recording.
Okay, so I didn't want to say too much during the Let's Talk because now we're going to talk about how we fall into idolatry based on what has nurtured us, so our environment. And I didn't want to give too much away, so let's get into it. So, Some people might have seen this, but this is based on a psychology theory called ecological systems theory. This is like a thing that always stood out to me when I was studying it in school because I felt like it really was something that all of us can actually really connect to and relate to, and it's very it just puts our experience into a visual form. So this chart allows us to see how systems built around us interact and influence us. So us as the individual are at the center, but the things closest to us are work, school, friends, family, neighbors, and those are the things that have the most influence on us and also vice versa. So we can also influence those things, but those are the things in our closest circle. But as you get further and further out, you see the things that are influencing that, which can be it's your extended family, mass media, local government, parents and friends. So those things interact with your close circle. And then outside of that, you have social norms, the economic system, the political systems, and culture. And then on the very outer edge, kind of encapsulating everything is time, which is kind of funny that someone brought that up in our talk time talking about how the time really does change the environment and the culture that we're in, because that's true. Like whatever we are experiencing in the world is still very dependent on whatever time frame we're in. So I say all this to say that idols are not only created by us. So when we talk about idols being things man-made and created by our hands, we don't just create our own idols all the time, but they are created within the greater world around us, and they are all vying for not only our worship, but for general worship. So the whole thing about idols is that it wants to gather as much worship as possible. So it's not just you who are going to worship these things, but they want to get the general collective worshiping them. The more worship, the better, right? Can go on to the next one. So, idols of surrounding nations. So, like us today, the Israelites were called to be set apart, but bent to the beliefs of nations around them once they reached the promised land. So, we were talking about Exodus and we were talking about them leaving Egypt. But once they were chosen as Yah's chosen people, they were still surrounded by all of these nations who had their own little gods. So, Judges 2:11 through 12 in the AMP says, then the Israelites did evil in the sight of Yah and worshipped and served the Baals. And they abandoned Yah, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from the gods of the people who were around them, and they bowed down to them and offended and provoked the Lord to anger. So showing that from time, what was surrounding someone was able to influence them. These are the chosen people of Yah, and they saw all the great things that he did in Egypt, but all these other gods around them influenced them and were able to obtain their worship. Next. So our surroundings, our current surroundings are American culture, right? So the culture, if we were basically like the Israelites and the surrounding nations around us, our closest surrounding nation is American culture. Like everybody that we interact with is interacting within the American culture. And culture is the beliefs, customs, art, etc. of a particular social group, place, or time. So the mediums of influence are the ways that that culture is shown in our day-to-day living. So it's the things that we interact with on the day-to-day basis that can show us what the culture around us is giving all of its attention to. What is everybody paying attention to? What is everybody valuing? What is everybody believing in? We're able to kind of pull those things by looking at these mediums of influence. So some of those things are social media, we already touched on that a little bit, but social media is a really big one these days. Almost everybody has a phone in their hands. You're able to see so many people around the world and what they say about things. So social media is a really good way to see what everybody is giving their worship to because you're seeing exactly what everybody is sharing and uploading and doing all the things. Film and television. So whatever we watch on TV, whatever we're seeing, like what messages are they showing on TV? What is something that's a constant? Almost every show has an episode on what, like there's always things that are film in our film and television that will show us what exactly is being pushed on us, what they want us to idolize. political policy, like what are people wanting to be laws, products and marketing. When you go to the store, what kind of products are they trying to sell you? What are they telling you that you should be valuing? Music, what is your music talking about? What are the constant themes of the music? What is your favorite artist talking about? What are they wearing? All of those things. Education, the career and job market. What are those jobs that everybody wants? What industries are those within? You can see kind of the way that the world is going based on all of those things. Health and wellness trends. So, what is everyone going to feel healthy, to feel comfort, to take care of themselves? What are the things that are being pushed upon people to go to? What are they being told to direct their attention to in order to obtain health and wellness? Holidays and ceremonies are a really big one. What are those things, those days that are able to gather mass attention? What are those days that everybody is able to suddenly have time off? What are those things that are able to pull mass amounts of people together to bring their attention? Award shows, things like that are things that are able to that we're able to kind of extract, like what are the idols or what are the values that are within these things? Fashion, how are people dressing? Language, and language is not just about like English, Spanish, or French, but how are people talking about each other? What are the words that are being used? All of these things are allowing us to kind of extract and pull what the idols of our culture are if we really pay attention to them. So, idol self. So, if you look at a lot of those things that we just talked about, a really big one is self-idolatry, and we talked about that in the last Bible study. Self-idolatry is kind of one of the biggest roots of all other idolatry. We always want to run to things for our own comfort. Our culture says do what you want, and it encourages things like mixing religions because it says what resonates with you. What makes you feel comfortable? What do you want to do? What is your personal brand? What is your image? All of these things that are very centered about you. The customer is always right, and you being the customer. Like it's always all of these different things to draw your attention to you and yourself, and to the point of mixing religions. That's how people end up saying, like, oh, I'm going to do yoga, but I'm a Christian because yoga makes me feel good and all these different things. But in reality, you're bowing down to Hindu gods, or I want Tibetan sound bowls, but those are Buddhist. There are all these different ways that they've pushed you being at the center of everything and your comfort and how you feel at the center of things, but that allows you to idolize other things. Now, the word says in Romans 8, 6 through 7, the mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. So while the world is pushing you in this direction and pushing you to idolize self, this is what the word says. And that's how we can always see that something is an idol if it directly goes against whatever Yah says, but the world is putting it on a pedestal, then that's probably something that they're trying to push us to idolize. To the next slide. And another big one in American culture is money. So our culture says money talks, money is power, cash is king. It's the main source of our motivation. We go to work for money, we get an education for money. We wake up every day trying to get money to survive, right? The American dream is very heavily tied to the idea of being able to acquire wealth and nice things. Money is very heavily idolized in our society. However, the word says in 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So why is this thing that is called evil in the world, I mean, in the word, being put on a pedestal in the world? That's probably a good sign that it's an idol. If we're all trying to get to money and doing all these things to get money, but the word is giving us the alarm that it's evil, there's something wrong there and there's a disconnect. Next. Substance use. So in the world, there's a lot of substance use, and I think that's really overlooked a lot of times, but substances are looked at as something that's fun, social. Everywhere we go, you can probably get a drink. It's something casual and relaxing. It gets associated with maturity. I remember watching TV growing up, everything like anytime somebody made like a big business deal or something like that, or they went into their really nice office and they had a really high position, they would have the little bar in their office and they would pour a glass of straight whiskey. That's that messaging that we're talking about. You can look in television, you can look at some of those things of our culture that are really popular and see something that's idolized. If you go out to have fun, there's probably liquor there. Anytime you want to socialize with people, you're told to go to a bar, told to go to clubs. That's what's available there is alcohol. So why is this thing everywhere? It's an idol. And then we kind of trick ourselves by saying that some are acceptable and some are unacceptable substances, right? So someone's doing heroin, we're like, that's too much. But yet everybody is drinking alcohol and smoking weed, so it's a very slippery slope. There's an idolization there towards substances and escapism that's being ignored because the word says in Proverbs 2:1, wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise. So that directly goes against this idea of maturity and being a professional person who drinks all these things and has all these fancy wines. But the word says something exactly against that. First Peter 5:8 says, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. So the word specifically warns against substances and not being sober, even though it's something that's very constant and very prevalent in our world. Another idol is sex. A very big idol in our culture is sex. So, sexual liberation are some of the things that you would hear. Sex sells. It can be casual. It can be premarital. Again, bringing it back to the TV because that was something that was really influential for me growing up. Anything that you see on TV, you see people in high school, they're having sex. Teenagers are always having sex on TV. Almost any show that you watch, you will have to avoid sex scenes, or even they'll talk about it. They talk about it very casually, in ads and all these things around us. And most people these days are casually having sex. And it's also talked about as completely for your pleasure. However, the word says in Deuteronomy 22:28 through 29, if a man finds a young woman who's a virgin and is not betrothed, and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, then the man who lay with her shall give to the young woman's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he has humbled her, and he shall not be permitted to divorce her all his days. So in the word, we can see that sex is a really big deal. You're not supposed to just be willy-nilly lying with people and doing all these things. And if everybody that we knew had to marry the first person that they had sex with, we would be a completely different society, right? So the word puts it in this way, and our culture has a very different idea of how we should be viewing sex, right? Next. And then the last one, but not least, is celebrities. So celebrity is a really, really big one in our culture. We have American idols, and they kind of embody a bunch of other different things that we idolize. So we can go on and on about all these different things like beauty, money, talent. Those are all idols, and our celebrities embody all of those things, right? They are their own idols. And they tell us that that's what we should strive to be. From a very young age, you're told, like, who's your role model? And you're told to study all these people who are celebrities and choose which one you want to be like. Because we're striving to be like them, and they embody all the other idols that we've been taught about in culture. They are the embodiment of the culture. So, however, the word says in 1 John 2:5 through 7, whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk just as he walked. So while the culture is pushing us to be like celebrities and be like role models and all these other people, we're supposed to be striving to be like Yeshua. So that is automatically an idol if we're trying to be like all these other people who are actually just humans just like us, and us ourselves a lot of times trying to become celebrities. That is the thing to be. we're directly going against the word. We're trying to be like Yeshua, not like these human beings who are just embodying other things. Next. So, with that being said, we live in a very worldly culture. So much of the culture that we interact with on a daily basis is reflective of the culture that's actually expected in the last days. So, all of those values that we just talked about, we can look at 2 Timothy 3 1 through 5. It says, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. So that actually sounds exactly like the culture that's around us, exactly like what is being pushed around us every single day. We encounter people who are exactly like this, and we're constantly ourselves trying to fight also becoming like this. And we can have some of these traits and constantly have to fight against that because that's just what's around us and what's being pushed. And then another part is that having a form of godliness but denying its power. Because America also says, in God we trust, right? There's this idea that it's a majority Christian nation, but we don't actually believe, according to all the idols that we just looked over, what is actually supposed to be said about all of those things according to the word. There's this whole new idea that's set forth through idolatry. Next. So going back to the ecological systems theory, what do we have control over, right? The closest thing to us is the work, school, family, neighbors, friends. All those things within our culture interact with them and they still touch us and we're still impacted by them, but there is still like a bubble of control that we have, right? Next. So we have to choose our environment. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. And 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 16 says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? For we are the temple of the living God, and Yah has said, I will live with them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. So we have to choose to be in environments that actually are supportive of our worship of Yah and are not constantly putting ourselves in situations where we're having to fight against idolatry. Because if the people around us are a part of the culture, and they worship the culture on a consistent basis, then that has the ability to seep into how we see the world and take over what how Yah actually wants us to see things and what his kingdom culture is, because we're constantly allowing ourselves to be influenced by people who are influenced by the world, right? So you decide. Joshua 24:15 says, if it is unacceptable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, so as in our first half we talked about those generational idols, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, so those cultural idols that we just talked about. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So let's talk. What are some family or cultural idols that you struggle to let go of?
We
You can
can
turn
stop the
off the
recording.
recording.